Good morning, Crossroads Nation. How are you? My name is Skip Nelson. I'm a financial advisor with Thrivent Financial and one of the volunteers that make Crossroads happen. There's a number of us. It's great to have you here this morning. We're excited to have you. Got a lot of things in store. We've always got a lot of new people that join us. We've got a big crowd here this morning. And we just want to make sure that everybody's aware of all the many resources that we have here at Crossroads. How many would just like to cut through all this and just have a bag of money to help you with the job search? Maybe not even have to work. Because I've got a big bag of money right here. But since it's virtual, unfortunately, I can't get it to you. So other than a bag of money, I've got a lot of great resources that we can share through Crossroads that'll help you along the way. And so we'll share about what some of those are. So if you have heard this journey and about a lot of these resources and you've been at Crossroads before, just hang with us. We'll go through for some of those that have not heard it. We work out of the Crossroads group through Grace Church in Eden Prairie. However, there are 3 Crossroads locations that we have meetings in, and we're all combining together for an online effort here during the virtual meetings that we've been holding. We're hoping to get back to in-person meetings soon, but recently decided that we're going to stay virtual probably through the end of the year, but we will certainly update in upcoming months, and the goal is to get back to in-person as quickly as possible. Really looking forward to the presentation today. I know you're really going to get a lot out of it, and hopefully some encouragement along the way. I'll give you an overview, kind of what is available to you through Crossroads. Like I said, there is a ton of content to help you along the way. I know in my job transition, I felt kind of alone sometimes and lost, didn't know what I was doing. And the Crossroads group was amazing in helping fill out those voids with guidance and people to walk through the journey of transition with you. So we'll go over some of that. I think you'll find it to be incredibly helpful. But I also just wanted to show and share a little perspective, because I found in my job transition, the transition itself to be one of the more difficult things I'd ever been through. I had my own business. It was my choice to get into job transition. I was just burned out and wanted to do something else. But the way the job transition unfolded was not of my doing. It didn't unfold the way I thought. I just figured I'd go on a couple interviews and filled a couple applications and take my pick from the numerous jobs that would just be thrown at my feet. Well, that didn't happen. And I don't know about you, but you might have found the same thing, that it's maybe not unfolding the way you wanted. And there was a piece of scripture that I found particularly helpful, and it is James 1:2-4. And it said this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking anything." It's hard sometimes to view our trials in life as opportunities to mature and grow. I know I found in my job transition that I just was looking, it'd be nice to get the memo from God as to, I know he's got a plan, but could I get a hint kind of what it is? How long is this going to take or whatever? But a lot of times we don't get that, but God does have a plan, and he is there. And I wish in life that it was the fun times and when everything was going my way that were most instructive and growth supportive in my journey of life. But unfortunately, I found that it was the trials that I learned the most, that I was kind of stretched the most, and job transition was no different. But hopefully you'll find in that journey, turn to Crossroads for resources, that you are not in this alone, but also turn to God, because God is there every step of the way, and he has got a plan for you, even though you might not know what it is, better than anything you can imagine. And there is an opportunity out there that you will find in God's timing that I bet will be beyond anything that you had hoped for and fulfill everything that you want as far as your transition journey. So I hope that is the case for you. And let's just have a moment of prayer in that regard. If you join me, please. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for Crossroads and the many people here to help those in transition. And Lord, I just ask that you are with every person on this call that is going through job transition, that has worries and concerns and uncertainty as to what the future holds, and help them to feel your presence. Help them to know that you are there with them every step of the way, and you will guide them through resources like Crossroads and people in their lives to find that next opportunity, and it'll be better than they can imagine. In your heavenly name, amen. Let me share my some slides with you, if that's okay, and we will get underway here for some of the many resources that Crossroads has got for you, of which there are many, many, many. So hopefully you can see that okay. We find that in this group, there are a lot of different people and a lot of different resources. And our goal is to have resources that will help each of you in your own individual journey. It doesn't seem to be advancing here. Why is it not moving? Well, welcome. We've got that established. It'd be nice if we could get beyond that here. Let's see here. There we go. Beautiful. So the agenda for this morning, you'll hear me for a few more minutes and just going through some of the resources. At 7:45, we'll be introducing Stuart Schultz, who is going to share a bit about his journey of transition and a really cool message that I think you will really appreciate. And then at 7:55, our keynote, if that's the proper term, Leary Gates is going to be talking about how to make sure that your next job search is a Bluebird and not a Buzzard. And I think we'd all want Bluebirds, and he's got some wonderful insights to help in that regard. At 8:55, I'll pop back and do wrap up, and then we'll be done to get out by 9. Again, there are 3 Crossroads groups. The first one at Grace Church in Eden Prairie. The second in Woodbury at Woodbury Lutheran, and the third in Arden Hills at North Heights Lutheran Church. All those you can find, along with all the other details. Please don't hesitate to use that at mncrossroads.com. That is your go-to source for everything that Crossroads offers. So it's a great tool, and there's a lot of stuff on it. Everything for job seekers. There is a job board as far as actual positions available. Tons of content and things. So please go to mncrossroads.com. You will find a lot of wonderful resources in your job search. But on a weekly basis, there's a lot of stuff going on at Crossroads. Right after this meeting, actually, there is a networking meeting that meets every Thursday between 9 and 11. You do have to sign up in advance because it fills up. It's probably one of the more popular job transition networking groups in the Twin Cities, run by the Wesses, Tang, and Roper, and they do a phenomenal job. And if you have not been, sign up and go. Today is probably full, but sign up for the next opportunity. It's a great networking group as a way to meet other people in job transition and offer targeted companies that you want, and have a bunch of people that will work to help you get plugged in for contacts in your transition journey. Secondly, there's one-on-one coaching that you can hook up with people that can meet with you individually to address any specific questions you have in job transition. Could be going through your resume, which is always fun, right? A lot of opinions about your resume from everybody you talk to probably, but could be that, could be talking about career opportunities, could be talking about how to just go through job transition and accessing different opportunities. You could do a mock interview or whatever you want. You can sign up for one-on-one coaching. There's a bunch of us out there that are there to help, so don't hesitate to do it. And then lastly, but certainly not least, there is prayer support. We're big believers in the power of prayer. And you can sign up for that if you have specific things you want to pray for, whether it's just your own journey and support in making it through that, or other things. You have a job interview coming up or anything that you want. Don't hesitate to reach out for prayer support. And then, of course, there's online classes. We have an 8-week class structure for helping you through job transition and getting through it as quickly as possible, and every nuance of that. I mean, and look at the things there. Everything that I found in my transition that was critical: attitude, assessments, networking, targeting, resumes, interviewing, everything you can possibly imagine is covered. And you go through with a specific coach and 6 or 10 others that you can go through this journey together and kind of share your experience together. It's a great way to do it. I found it as a phenomenal resource. So classes begin every single month. And so if you can always get in one. If you've been through and you want to go through again with a different coach and get a little different perspective, do so. But again, the webinar is the place to go to check on that. Also, make sure you join the LinkedIn group, Minnesota Crossroads Career Network. We have over 1,800 alumni that have been through job transition. They are there to give back, and they are there to help you in that regard. So do not hesitate to get on that network and LinkedIn and utilize it. It's a fantastic resource. There's also additional resources, a lot of companies that come together to help our effort at Grace Crossroads. I'm very proud that my company, Thrivent, has had a long-standing relationship with Crossroads and helps in a variety of different ways. And there's a lot of companies that do that. This group of Grace Crossroads doesn't happen without the support of a lot of wonderful organizations and volunteers. And so make sure you check those resources and companies that are there to offer other resources to help in your journey. So again, look for the job group link on our homepage. As I've referenced a couple times, there is a lot of people that makes this happen. Harry Urschel does a phenomenal job and has put together an incredible team of people that are here to help you. You are not on this journey alone. Most of these people have been through job transition. They know the gig. They know what it's like. They know the ups and downs. They know all of that. And they've come through on the other side. Plus, they've coached a lot of people along the way. So they're incredible resources. So don't hesitate to reach out. We are all here to help you in your specific journey of job transition. As far as Sunday morning, again, we've got 3 different churches that we work with in this process. And so don't hesitate to reach out if you're looking for a church home or whatever. They're wonderful organizations. The websites are there. So don't hesitate to reach out to Woodbury Lutheran, North Heights, or Grace Church for specific information on each of those individual ministries that they offer. So, done with that. And I would like to continue by introducing Stuart Schultz, as I referenced earlier. Stuart, and I'll just look at, Stuart's got a lot of things to offer, but he has been through a journey and a lot of other things, as we do in life, right? We can always control whether it's job transition or anything else. And I know I found it really helpful in my transition to hear from other people that have been through life and kind of how they did it and came through on the other side, which you all will too. Stuart is got a great story, and we're lucky to have him willing to share it. So at this point, Stuart, I'd turn it over to you, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Skip. Good morning, everyone. Thanks.
Stuart, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Sorry. I hit the unmute button, but too many things popped up at once. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Stuart Schultz. I live here in Minnetonka. My wife and I have been married 32 years. We have 5 adult children. My last 5 is in college or trying to do college distant learning, at least at this point. But so I currently work at a agricultural company named Cargill. It's one of the smaller ones out there for those of you that don't know, but no, Cargill is very large. And I'm a business process manager, and I work in stevia and global supply chain of that product. So if you look at Trevia, you might see that on the store shelf as a high intensity sweetener. I currently work in a global supply chain and manage getting that product from around the world to Cargill and then back out to its customers. So my story in 2009, 2010, I went through a job transition and had found myself coming into Crossroads and all of the great services that they provide and the things that they offer. But so for me, my background was a scientist. I was raised up in chemistry and biology, and after school, I started my first 10 years of my career with Coca-Cola. I was a chemist for Coca-Cola Fountain, and I worked 10 years for them. But I also, during that time, did ministry training, and then I switched halfway through my career and went into full-time ministry. I was a staff pastor at a church in Eden Prairie. And then now my last 10 years has been back in the food industry. But in 2008, I really felt like God was telling me to close the chapter on my ministry section of my life and just resign my position. And felt very much like the story of Abraham in the Bible, where you just kind of get a cue from God and you just say, yes, sir, and obey it. And, you know, lo and behold, in 2008, 2009 was another significant downturn in our economy. And so I found myself with a sea of people in the same boat looking for a job. I hadn't updated my resume probably in 11 plus years since I had gone into ministry. And I found having to re-network, rebrand myself, re-identify myself, you know, go into negotiations and all those things. And so I want to share with you just a couple of buckets that I learned through that process. And I forgot to start my clock, but I'll just go to 8 minutes here because I only have 10. So in all of this, bucket number 1, so you need to network and get out your personal brand and stay out there. I thought for me, I could just kind of fall back on my laurels, call Coca-Cola back up, slide back into my job. You know, I had put in my 10 years with working full time for the Lord, and, you know, he was just going to make it all happen. Well, that wasn't going to be the case. And, you know, I found myself having to, I also thought that, you know, if I would just sit and apply online to 25 jobs a day, something would land. And really started coming into this thing where, you know, you really got to start to put the work in. And when you think about talking about running a marathon race, I was a runner in my youth. I mean, there's a planning that you have to do and a diligence that you do and all those attributes to get ready for that race. You just don't show up race day and go and it's going to fall into your lap. So I would encourage you, like, you need to network, work on your personal brand, build your skills, join the resources that can help you. And so, but really for your networking, you got to network. And that's really huge in that part of your job search. And so, but look to your networks that you were part of that you would not think of traditionally would be a network for you to aid in your job search, to help you connect to other people. So for instance, like I was a little league coach. I reached out to my little league coaches from, you know, 3 or 4 years of coaching, and I got just a number of different opportunities there. So for me, when I resigned from nonprofits are not required to pay into unemployment insurance. So even in my resignation, I was supported by the church for a period of time, which was great, but I didn't have a long-standing, you know, package. I didn't have unemployment to even apply for. So I had my first of 5 kids going into college. I had to take any job I could find to support my family. So, you know, through my networks, through Little League, I got a part-time job at Three Rivers Park District through a friend. I got a job parking cars for the PGA event at Hazeltine that year. Through another church network, I got a role at General Mills in the research department. Through another friend, I got a job in construction. And so I was out for 11 months and I had to do all these little piecemeal jobs to go into, but it was through my networks and ultimately another network of one of my Little League friend coaches introduced me to a vice president at Cargill. And it was from that vice president's point to probably 15 to 20 networkings within Cargill that got me to my current role there and landing. So look at your networks, look at the groups that you've been part of, and you know, whatever those might be, whether it's church or friends or relatives, or mine was Little League, you know, you can have other kind of running groups or whatever those are, but look to those networks to help build that up. So prepare your stars, so situation, task, action, and result for your interviewing skills, and explain a situation. So you have 2 stars of how you know, solve conflict resolution, 2 stars already on how you lead a group of people that you don't manage and have influencing skills, 2 stars of how you managed a project, and be able to take those stars and go, what was the situation, what was the task, what was the action, what was the result, and make sure you include metrics in that result. So if you were going to increase productivity or you're going to reduce cost, all those kind of things. But have a group. Anytime I went into an interview or went into any kind of networking opportunity, I would always have my stars with me and have those memorized for that job, so I could just flip back and forth depending on the interview question that I had. So bucket 1, you need to network, you need to increase your personal brand, you need to hone your skills. And I tell you, it was a savior for me to come in when somebody asked me to join Crossroads, and I joined a small group and just had that support group of other people that were going through it at the same time, kind of in a smaller, you know, community. And we still have connections to those people even to this day, even though that was 2010. So that was bucket 1. Bucket 2, rejection is protection. So sometimes you can really look at a role and you can say, this is the one for me, and oh, it's got to work out. And sorry, I'm getting the sun coming into my screen porch here, so I'm trying to turn. But if you get rejected on a job, you need to really see that as protection, okay? And I told you how I networked really hard to get into Cargill. And probably 9 months, 10 months into my job search, I finally landed a really nice interview for a role I wanted. I came down to 2 people. It was for a relocation in Georgia. They flew me to Georgia. I met with a plant team. And I remember where I was down at my college, daughter's college in that fall, and got the call standing in a dorm room that I didn't get the job, and I was literally crushed. I mean, I was like, you know, Lord, I've been out for 10 months here. I've been doing any kind of odd job I can to take care of my family. And, you know, I didn't get it, you know, and what's going on. So as I fast forward now and look at working for Cargill, I went back and saw that job, and you know, you can look in bigger corporations and there's just some more challenging jobs, but that was a more challenging job, and it was really what I would term a career killer. I mean, nobody had ever taken that job and made it in that job more than 2 years without having to go to another part of the company or having to leave the company. And so, you know, when you look at those opportunities, just know that God works all things together for good, and he's got your back. And sometimes it's really hard to get that news, and you're right at kind of the precipice of your hope and all that coming in, but you really need to see that rejection is protection. Third bucket, don't snub your nose or you know, kind of dismiss smaller opportunities, because when you look at that, crumbs, you know, a trail of crumbs will eventually lead to the loaves. And when I was working at General Mills for a part-time section, I was networking General Mills pretty hard, Cargill pretty hard, Coca-Cola pretty hard, you know, a lot of food industries, coming back in on my quality credentials as a quality manager, things like that. And I remember at the research center, they had this, you know, walk for health during lunchtime, you know, instead of, you know, eating a fast food lunch, go out and walk. And they were going to have some of the directors or leaders of the company, of the quality group and the research and development group there. And I was like, you know, I'm not going to go on that walk. You know, they're going to, you know, think something's weird and all this stuff. But, you know, I just humbled myself, went on the walk. It ended up there's only 2 people in like this building of 500 people that showed up for this walk. So I had literally the 4 top quality directors of General Mills alone on this walk with me to go for a 45-minute walk. And it was through that connection that I basically was able to network with one of the quality directors and then interview through their whole director core and then get a job offer from General Mills. That was a relocation to move to another state. But At the same time, then I was asked to look for another opportunity um, of Faribault Foods, and it was not for the job I wanted, but I wanted an interview. And when I interviewed, they said, you know what, we think you're overqualified for this role, but because um, you know, we like you so much, there's a role that we were going to actually kind of stand up 6 months from now, but we're going to do it earlier. And so they usually go through a very formalized process of probably 2 weeks to take somebody through hiring and going through the core. They threw all that out and gave me an offer within 2 days. So here I went from 11 months being out of work to having 2 offers at the same time from 2 very, you know, good companies. In the end, I decided to go to Faribault Foods, and I started that career with them, and I get back in the food industry. And then Cargill called back up 2 years later and said, hey, we liked you so much from your first interview, even though you weren't the key person for that role. You know, what would you think about coming back to Cargill? So I interviewed and I got that role, and that was 8 years ago. I've been with Cargill now 8 years. I've jumped 3 times within Cargill for different roles, and there's still the need, even within a big conglomerate, to network and work and do all these things and to keep your skills there. So I'll end with this. I'm looking at my time here, is, you know, just want to encourage you to be a fountain and not a drain. Scripture talks about in Psalm 87 that all our fountains are in you or in the Lord. And when you think about it, when you go past a water fountain or a fountain in a park, you never see it sucking in and sucking the water down. You always see it pushing out. And so in all those experiences, whether I was at the PGA parking cars or in construction or at General Mills, I always look for opportunities to minister out and to minister into other people. And, you know, I did UPS driver's helper at one time. It's, and all those things I looked. And just one quick short story at the end is, you know, we were at the Minnesota Job Workforce Center learning how to interview. I signed up for this course, and it was wintertime and kind of a really bad morning commute. And the class was sold out, and then only 4 of us showed up. So 4 of us are meeting with the guy teaching the class, and he said, what's your story? Going around the table. And the first woman said she had been laid off by a big company here in town, and she basically broke down and started crying. And then the second guy said he had the same situation, and he started to tear up and said, you know, I can't get any kind of depression counseling because unemployment insurance doesn't pay for that. And then another woman, she also started to sob, and you know, you could tell that it's just really hard. And it is, you know, it plays on your hope and your future and your security. And so I just went for it and said, you know what? You're always going to be let down by man in some regard. There's going to be something that happens where you're going to feel like someone doesn't have your back, but God's always going to have your back. He's always going to believe in you. And so I just took that opportunity, invested. I showed them how I prep for stars and prep for interview. And one of those ladies actually had a interview with a nonprofit the very next day. And later on, she sent me a note and she said, you know what, I just want to let you know I got the job. And I think it was because you were so patient to go with me through the stars and get me prepped and do all these things that I actually was able to nail the interview, get the offer, get the job. And I really just want to thank you for it. So I want to encourage you too, that we can get in situations and circles of life and we kind of gaze at our navels and wonder why we're here. But I would just encourage you to look out and be a fountain and don't be a drain in this time, because as you pour into other people, you're going to see that God's going to pour into you. So 4 quick things to recap. You know, get your network, your personal brand, stay out there, join the groups and use the skills and those tools that are available. Recognize that rejection is protection for you. Don't dismiss the small opportunities. And then also, you know, just be a fountain and a drain and give out in this time, even though you feel like everything is kind of closing in. So really appreciate the time. Again, I've been part of Crossroads and the ministry team there after I joined them for 2 or 3 years until Cargill started making me travel around the world, and it was very more difficult to be on the team. But I want to thank you for your time. If there's any way I can help you, I am out there on LinkedIn. Last name is Schultz without a T, so Stuart Schultz. You can just find me, and I'm happy to connect with you. But thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stuart. What a message. And man, I was taking notes. A lot of great nuggets. Really, really helpful in all of our journeys, whether it's job transition or not. Now, I would love to introduce Leary Gates. Leary is a founding partner of a business growth agency called Coefficient Advisors. And he's also a personal and corporate venture coach, as well as a number of other pursuits in ministry and life. If you do have any questions that you would like to pose to Leary, you can type them into the Q&A box right at the bottom of your screen of your Zoom app as we go along, and we will funnel them to Leary, and he'll be more than happy to address them. But really, we're so thrilled to have you, Leary. Thanks for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Stuart, just because some people might have come late and they missed your bag of money, could you hold that up again?
Oh, sure.
All right. So Stuart, you were offering to get rid of that, but you couldn't get out. But I've got an Uber on its way to pick that, unload you from your bag of money. Okay. So just wanted to let you know there are ways of getting around this pandemic. Right.
That's creative. Nobody's ever gone there. So it'll be here. Uber,
all right.
Ready.
I'm ready.
Nice tip, probably.
Well, good morning, everybody. I should say happy pandemic, right? Isn't this one of those things that we are struggling with, and maybe we're a little bit slap happy by now. But since you're used to surprises, here's the next one for you. Your speaker hasn't had a job or looked for one in 25 years. And so what are you going to get out of a talk about job transition from a guy who hasn't had to do it in 25 years? My last job was with Cray Research. But for nearly 30 years, I've launched a number of businesses, launched a number of nonprofits. I've been advising companies from Fortune 500 to startups on corporate market development. As Skip said, I'm the managing partner at Coefficient Advisors, and I've been a venture coach and still continue to do so, meeting with hundreds of leaders on their life mission, business venturing, and just coaching executive leaders on what they should do next with their life. I want to talk to you today about Bluebirds and Buzzards. And let's see, I'm just trying to figure out where do I screen share. Here we go. It's an odd title, to be sure, and I know that you must have more than a mild bit of interest or nothing else to do this morning to join a call that's talking about Bluebirds and Buzzards. But you'll see where I'm going with that in just a little bit. I want to first ask a question, and the question is, what do you suppose is the worst investment you could make in 2020? At the beginning of 2020, what's the worst investment you could make? Now, you could pick a bunch of stocks because a lot of them, went down with the COVID scare and with the whole pandemic. But I want to suggest the worst investment you could make is probably this right here, a monthly planner. Of course, everything that we might have thought about at the beginning of the year just was decimated, and we just faced a huge degree of disruption. When the pandemic first hit for us, we lost about 80% of our revenue overnight because it hit one of our big clients, several of our clients that we lost, but one of our big ones in particular. And that's that's devastating. And I think if you've experienced a job loss through the pandemic as well, any job loss is devastating. But when you're being displaced and there's not much you can do about it, and there's not a lot of roads that are obvious to take there because there's so many people looking for work, it can be very angering. And I'm sure that all of you have processed that or are processing it. And for me, I'd wake up, quite angry, and then I'd vacillate. I'd go to hope. It's like God is over all this. He knew this was going to happen. He's got my back. I just don't know how that's going to work right now. I got into this path and this rhythm of how things were going to work in life, and now all of a sudden, all of the constraints have been removed in the sense that I no longer now feel like I have control. And the question for us, and I'm guessing that all of you are leaders looking for leadership type of roles. But the question is, how do we lead well when everything has changed, when we can't depend on what we used to be able to depend on, when we can't control what we thought we could, and we may even be motivating ourselves, having a hard time to motivate ourselves. And that's a challenge, of course, that we're all dealing with. I just want to direct your attention to the chat box. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like to just ask everyone to take a moment and just type in either a C if you lost your job because of COVID, or BC if you are looking for work before the COVID crisis. I just want to get a sense of where people are at. A lot of BCs. Okay, good. Okay, couple of yep, good. I've got running BCs to Cs is quite high right now, so it looks like a lot of you guys have been looking for work even before the pandemic. So, okay, regardless of whether there's a global disruption, which is a pandemic that hits all of us, or a personal disruption that hits you, I hope that what we talk about today will inspire you in some way. I don't have the opportunity to sit with each of you to hear your story. So really the best I can do this morning is to set the table and maybe stimulate some thinking. And that's going to require a little bit of commitment on your part. So I want to just ask for you to make a commitment to one idea. And I want to talk about something that's really been affecting me and the way I think about my future and the way I think about the decisions that I need to make. And I want to ask that as I go through this presentation, if there's something that hits you, just to take a note of that, or even if something I say leads you astream and you forget everything else that I'm talking about, but it's an important thought for you to grab a hold of, do so. Follow that and write it down so that you understand what it is, or at least the thing that is the takeaway for you. Because the last thing that you need, you've got so many opportunities to pursue, and the Bible says to make the most of every opportunity. The last thing you need is to spend an hour here this morning and not get anything from it. So I know it's often difficult to stay committed to the presentation, especially when it's in webinar format, and I can't, you could go get your breakfast or do whatever you want during this time. But if you make that commitment right now to one idea, I think God will reward you for it. And it's most likely going to be something that he tells you, not something that I've said. Well, I want to talk about disruption first of all, because it's not all bad news. All right. And here's the disruption, whether it's a pandemic or just an individual job loss that you've had. There's good news in disruption, and the problem is it's hidden. And the reason it's hidden is because we are not necessarily aware of it. We operate our lives with a set of boundaries and constraints and a notion about how the world works. We get into a rhythm, and that sets our expectations, and it allows us to carry forward. We'll see why that's the case in a minute. But I want to talk about, first of all, this poem that I remember from a long ago, and this sets the tone for what I think is the challenge that we have, and really where there's good news for disruption. If you haven't read it, Google The Calf Path by Sam Walter Foss. He wrote this in 1893, and he talks about a calf making a path home 300 years ago, and soon that calf that was wandering about to find his way home is followed by a lone dog, and then by sheep, and then by men. And Sam Walter Foss says these words in this poem: "A moral lesson this might teach, were I ordained and called to preach. For men are prone to go it blind along the calf paths of the mind, and work away from sun to sun to do what other men have done. They follow in the beaten track, and out and in and forth and back, and still their devious course pursue to keep the paths that others do." So the good news in transition that poem, I think, is pointing out is that we have an opportunity to create new paths. We have an opportunity to say, what is it that I am to do in this next chapter of life? When we grow up, everything is kind of sequential, right? We go to school, and we go to first grade, and we go to second grade, and we go to third grade, and on and on. We know that the next thing we do is go to the next thing that looks pretty much like the last thing that we did, until we graduate. And the first real crisis in life comes upon graduation. And that is, now all of a sudden, what do? There's no more, unless you go on to graduate school, and I guess some people are lifetime students, but generally that path stops. and you have to choose a new path. And that creates a crisis for many young adults. I certainly experienced it when I was a young adult. I'm guessing you did too. That similar crisis occurs during a transition as well, because you have the opportunity that at least the advancement opportunities perhaps in the company that you're in have ceased because you're no longer there, of course. But you also have a lot of opportunities to pursue a new path. And that's a vital thing to do. I remember talking to a woman who had been a client of mine. Actually, she was the director of sales for a company. And after she was let go, she networked with me, and we sat down for lunch. And I said, you know, what would you like to do? And her response was, well, you know what I've done sales and this, and she just kind of repeated her resume. I said, yeah, I know your resume. What I'm asking is, what do you want to do? And she stared at me as if she wasn't sure if I was asking the question about inner desire. And of course I was. I didn't say anything. I just stared back at her, and she said, you mean what I really want to do? And I said, yeah, what do you really want to do? She says, well, I personally, I just love to write children's books, you know? And I said, well, why don't you? What's keeping you from it? And we went through this whole list of things. Now, she could be a very good children's book writer, and there are people that make money at that. And it wasn't necessarily income that she was after. It was fulfillment. And one of the things that happens when we get into something is we stay in the calf paths of our mind, as Sam Walter Foss would say, and we don't think about how are the new paths, the new habits that we need to create. So there's a good reason to be taking time right now while you're in transition. This is the most vital time for you to rethink and recalibrate where you want to go in your life. And there's a really good reason to do this, and it's called your vitality. And I want to talk about the Gallup State of the American Workplace for a second. They did this study back in 2017, and here's what they found: that despite having 70% of the world's best organizations, 33% of the people working in them were engaged, meaning 2/3 are not engaged or actively disengaged. The point of that is the likelihood that you're going to end up somewhere, you want to make sure that you go there where you're going to have high engagement. There's no point in taking a job unless you need to in order to provide an income, like we heard from Stuart. That's totally valid. And maybe, you know, that's something, but you know, your purpose is something different. You're fulfilling a need as an end to meet an objective. But many times we end up just repeating what we've done before, and it's because we're comfortable with it and we're not willing to do the hard work of getting where we need to go that God might be calling us to. So know too that even though you might find that job where you get engaged, and maybe that's the bar you're setting, is I want to know I come alive when I'm going to work there. Know this: when you're there, 2/3 of the people perhaps may be unengaged as well. So you're going to be working with people who may not be as engaged as you are even. And that's a great opportunity for you. That's a great opportunity to encourage them and to strengthen them as well. I love this cartoon from the Far Side of Alexander the Great's mother saying, and another thing, I want you to be more assertive. I'm tired of everyone calling you Alexander the Pretty Good. Maybe that's his wife. But I've always liked that, because I think it's like, okay, you know, I've never done enough. You know, it's like, okay, now I've got to actually have my brand out there being Alexander the Great, not Alexander the Pretty Good. Here's the point I want to make. Getting to the right work is hard work. And the reason is because we have to overcome our reactive bias. That is, we want an immediate fix to things, and we evaluate our fixes and choose a fix. Rather than thinking strategically about whether our businesses or career, we rather rebuild and just have what we had before than redesign and come up with something that would be even more fulfilling and even greater than that. And to do that, we have to think strategically. We have to be really thoughtful in how we do that. Now, that's a problem, because a 2013 study of 12,000 professionals found that 70% don't have the time for creative or strategic thinking. 66 or 2/3 don't have the ability to focus on one thing at a time. And 60% say they do not have the opportunities to do what they most enjoy. Now, here's the question of that. Now, you have the time in transition to do the creative and strategic thinking that many people, when they're in the job, they're flying around when we could fly, or flying around and doing whatever. You have the time right now to engage in a way that you probably won't when you go into your next employment. And the problem is that we've been so conditioned by being in an environment for so long, like the frog in the kettle, that we forget to pause, take time, and reflect strategically about where we want to go and the opportunities that we have for that. And that's because we have basically a reactive bias. You know, we're a bit like an amoeba. You know, another Far Side. I love you get it that I love the Far Side here, and it's been so long. I'm glad he's brought some new cartoons out. But this again, the wife amoeba speaking to the other amoeba: stimulus response, don't you ever think? And isn't that so true for most of us in our life? We encounter something. In the case we're talking about this morning, we encounter a job loss, and we immediately want to go find that fix. And it's like, okay, we've got to do that. And there's a sense of panic and this sense of just doing the next thing that we can do. The problem is that we have to, in order to reset and recalibrate and determine where it is that perhaps we should go that would be better for us, we have to move away from this reactive bias. This reactive bias is what the neuroscientist Gregory Burns describes. He calls the brain a lazy piece of meat. And it's true. We create what's called heuristics, which are shortened ways for us to conserve energy. And to do so, we end up making decisions that are very instinctual, we might call, but they're really reactive decisions that we take. McKinsey Global Institute found that the average knowledge worker spends about 28% of his or her work week either writing, reading, or responding to email. I think that that's low. If I just look at my own life, we are conditioned every time we open up our email to respond to it, and everything comes at us asking for response. You just think about the things that you have and the technology that we've got now today. Everything is very interactive in the sense that I get a text message, it invokes a response. I get a social media post, it invokes a response. I get a phone call, or that's old school phone calls, or an email, or a Slack message, or whatever it is. Now I have this conditioned response that I have to create. And on top of that, according to a 2009 Ball State study, most Americans, no matter what their age, spend at least 8.5 hours a day looking at a television, a computer monitor, or a screen of their mobile phone, and frequently doing 2 or 3 of these simultaneously. With the pandemic, I'm guessing this number is quite a bit higher. If you look at just Netflix's subscriber results, I'm guessing that that's elevated quite a bit. One of the things that this does, though, is it causes us to literally think differently. And during this time, if you want a compelling read, I would recommend you looking at this book by Nicholas Carr called The Shallows. And he talks about what the internet is doing to our brain. And he says, with the exception of alphabets and the number system, the net may well be the most powerful mind-altering technology that has ever come into general use. It's a very compelling read. This was a finalist. This book was a finalist for a Nobel Prize. It's I said, really worth reading. In this book, he talks about one study that was pretty interesting. It was a comprehension study. They had students, because they always seem to choose students for doing these psychology experiments. So they had a bunch of students reading some text on a screen and then answering some comprehension questions about it afterwards. And they compared them to that was a control group, they compared to another group of students reading the exact same text, but in this case, they put hyperlinks on a number of the words. Words that might be confusing, or words that might be unfamiliar, words that might be somebody's name and you want to get a little background on who they are or whatever. So it's just basically learning aids. And they wanted to see how these learning aids affected comprehension. And what they found, quite surprisingly, was that the more hyperlinks they put in the document, the less the comprehension. And the reason is that every time we see a hyperlink, our brain has to shift to the other side, and now it is looking at now it's asking the question, do I want to click on that link? And it's even subliminal. You don't even necessarily think, do I want to click on that link? But your brain sees it because it's so conditioned to knowing that links mean you can click there, that what ends up happening is when you read a text that has hyperlinks, you're not getting the comprehension that you would read if you read the same text. It's frankly why I prefer reading hard paper books rather than electronic books. Even though the electronic books may not be hyperlinked, there's still so many possible distractions. Now, if you think about that, just look at the average web page. How many opportunities when you look at a website are you to be distracted? The result is what we call being shallow thinking, and we're conditioned to think very shallowly, and it's easy to get distracted. This is a guy that I have my squirrel moments, and this guy is right outside my window here at the office, and I love watching him. And I probably have gotten distracted from my job doing work by watching this squirrel for, I don't know, I can't tell you how many hours, just a little few minutes at a time. I'll watch him, and then, but it all accumulates. And it's like this, my attention is drawn away from something that I could be thinking on, literally by a squirrel moment. And it occurred to me after watching him, probably about cumulative 4 or 5 hours of watching this squirrel, that he isn't doing anything any different than any of the other squirrels. It's just he's an albino, so he stands out. But his behavior isn't any different. But for some reason, I just enjoyed watching him because he's distinctive. But the problem is that what that does is, of course, it distracts me from what I could be spending my time on. And thinking this way, thinking strategically and thinking deeply about your future, that's hard work. You may not be aware of this, but I read somewhere that a grand chess champion in competing in tournament play expends as many calories as a marathon runner, which I find phenomenal given that the number of calories that I feel like I expend when I just go to try to run a mile. So it is hard work. And the human brain is roughly 3% of our body weight, and yet it uses 20 to 25% of our daily energy supply. And that's really because we consume a lot of energy in our brain matter, but it doesn't always go to thinking about the deep stuff. In fact, Daniel Kahneman in a book called Thinking Fast and Slow talks about our brain having two systems. He describes system one as the unconscious part of our brain that's always on, it's automatic, it's biased, it takes all these shortcuts, and it's very gullible. And system two is the conscious part, where we have choice and concentration, and sometimes it's busy, it's often lazy, we don't want to engage it, and it's easily depleted. We get tired when we do. And what Nicholas Carr's point is that when we engage with the internet and all the tools that we have, we are being slowly conditioned to shifting more attention into the system one part of our brain, which is just automatic and biased. And I noticed this when I was preparing for a couple of podcasts that I had done with one of my millennial co-hosts. We'd come up with a topic idea, and I'd try to think it through and journal about it. And his immediate response was to Google it on the internet. It's like, okay, that's the first thing we do is we go get information from somewhere else. It's really tempting to just tie into systems that are readily available, and they're helpful. But if we don't take the time to consciously choose to think slowly about our future, we're going to end up going someplace just out of habit or automation, if you will. Alvin Toffler was considered one of the foremost futurists of our time. He was the author of Future Shock and 12 other books, and he said this: if you don't have a strategy, you're part of someone else's strategy. I think that that's brilliant insight. because oftentimes we just are doing stuff that we're not really even sure what it is that we want to do ourselves. And so it's so much easier just to submit ourselves to somebody else's strategy. He also said this, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that unlearning and relearning is that system 2 part of our brain that requires consciousness to be thinking about. Now, we end up taking decisions about our lives and even in our business that often are very, very quick. And Yale psychologist Robert Sternberg said this, that the essence of intelligence would seem to be in knowing when to act and think quickly and knowing when to act and think slowly. Some of the changes that you may need to make in life will require you to think slowly. And I would submit to you that a job transition is one of those times that you need to think slowly. And these are what Jeff Bezos would call a one-way door. He makes the distinction at Amazon with his leadership team between one-way doors and two-way doors, and they decide whether a decision is a one-way or a two-way door. And a two-way door one-way doors are those where if you make the decision, it's very, very difficult to go back. A two-way door is you make the decision and you can go back. And his point is you go fast on two-way doors. I mean, if you can make the decision and you can easily reverse it, then why not be decisive about making that decision? But you go slow on one-way doors. And often I find that the most perplexing decisions aren't one-way or two-way doors. They're kind of sticky two-way doors. You can go back, but it may hurt. And I think maybe taking up a job in an area you like, you know what you want to do, that the mission, and you've spent time thinking about it, you're aligned with what it is that you're looking for, you're very clear on that. Getting to a job in an area that you like and being offered with one that looks appealing to you and checks the box, that's a two-way door. You go in it, you take it, and you can always leave if you need to, but you take the opportunity that's there. But if you're at the point where you're trying to decide upon a new field or a career, you know, something is just not quite right and unsettled about where you were, that's probably a sticky door. And most of us need to really think through, you know, you could take a job, but it's going to be harder for you to then take another career change. So most of us don't take the time to think slowly. In fact, our culture doesn't really reward it. If you think about leadership, what I've discovered is that leaders are often praised by others for decisiveness. You hear people say that he's a decisive CEO, and that's very appealing. And of course, I think we all like to work for people who aren't wishy-washy. We want to know that they have conviction. But we hear less praise about a CEO who's deliberate. And deliberance is probably deliverance. I don't think that's a word. Being deliberate is probably a higher quality than decisiveness. And good strategy requires the ability for us to set aside reactive bias and learn to think slowly. You know, strategy in how we think about our future, it's dynamic and it's not static. You don't shift strategy every day, but it's tested every day. And all decisions have to be made that you make with your future about this strategic impact. So for instance, will the next job inquiry that you pursue, or the next networking event, or a book that you're ready to read, is that going to get you closer to your day? You know, you can't know the answer to that question until you stop and ask it. Is it going to get you closer to where you're trying to go today and your goal? Now, I read this yesterday in my Bible reading. I thought it really was pertinent for where I was at. And Psalm 103, it says, "I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless." And it made me pause and think slowly about that verse. I wonder about how many worthless things do I give attention to? What makes something worthless? How often do I stop to consider if a thing is worthless? You know, these are all good questions for me personally to dwell on, because I don't want to spend my time in worthless pursuits. And yet, if I'm not careful, I will move in the same way, in the same rhythm, with a reactive bias. And I need to constantly be vigilant to engage the system 2, the strategic part of my conscious brain, to say, look, is this getting me any closer to where I need to go? And to do that requires a consistent margin of time and intent. You've got to keep at this and do it consistently. Jim Collins put it this way. He said, the world is full of smart executives who take decisive action, and it's woefully short of wise executives who take decisive inaction, sometimes doing nothing because you don't have the path yet that you know you need to take is a best choice to make. Now, you're responsible for your own strategy, your personal strategy, and when you get into your job, your job strategy, your business, your work group, and the way you can think about these things is to think in terms of probabilities. Now, we serve a God that is able to do anything, and so in some ways, we can't assign a probability for what God's going to play in it, but we can talk and think about what are the probable outcomes that we can look for in ourselves. And so we need to begin thinking in terms of probabilities, not certainties. I love this book by Annie Duke she wrote called Thinking in Bets. And she says that life and business is more like poker than in chess. We often think about chess as being kind of the strategic game. But with chess, every move is fixed in the sense that once a move has been fixed, then it narrows the range of options of future moves. So it's a very fixed game. Whereas in poker, she's referring to it's more random. You have to play according to how you calculate the odds. And the key about that is if you let your hubris dominate, you're not testing your assumptions and you're likely to lose. And so the thing about it is that we can get confident, and I know that this is something that can be a challenge. She said this: we would be better served as communicators and decision makers if we thought less about whether we are confident in our beliefs and more about how confident we are. So what she's really saying is decide when you're looking at options in your life, put probabilities against those options. How confident are you that that particular thing that you're going to pursue is going to give you the results that you might expect? When I share this with CEOs, I talk about the outcomes of a particular deal, right? So as an illustration, you got three deals that you might be pursuing. One could be worth $150,000, one could be worth $10 million, and one could be worth $80,000. In the absence of any other data, I asked them, which option would they choose? Of course, the $10 million is most attractive. But if you thought like a poker player, you'd want to know the odds. And so let's just put outcome probability of 80 to 90% of getting the 150,000, less than 2% to get the 10 million, and 40 to 60 to get the $80,000. Now pursuing a $10 million deal with less than 2% odds of success could possibly jeopardize the 150 at 80 and 90% because you might spend as much time pursuing that deal. And that's the thing. When you pursue that next opportunity, when you pursue whatever you do, a networking event, whatever, you're trading off a commodity that you can't get back. You know this, right? You've got your time is the thing that's playing on. So thinking through your strategy about where you want to go and start to align the tactics to get you there. Otherwise, you're just doing a frenzy pace, trying to just run in circles and hope that somebody out there is going to throw something to you that can be helpful to you. And that is not thinking strategically, that's thinking reactively. Now, I know that this is a silly example, but I use it just to make a point because the point is that the outcomes that we might expect are not necessarily linked to the odds of the successful outcome. And if we have our emotions and let it carry us away, we may make a wrong bet. And that's important to remember because every day you're placing bets. You may not be conscious of it because your system one brain is working, it's being reactive, but how you allocate your resources is a bet that you're making based on assumptions that you have. And that's what we need to be aware of. So this is the real challenge we have. And I'm coming to the point about the Bluebirds and Buzzards that I promised you at the beginning of our time together. The key here is the real enemy of the strategic thinking that we're thinking about right now is opportunism. That's the enemy. It's not doing stuff. It's waiting for stuff to happen for you. I like this cartoon. This guy says, I'm an opportunist, just taking it easy until an opportunity comes along. All right, well, I don't think any of us want to take it easy. I think what we need to do is engage in the hard work of thinking about where we need to go and what we need to get there. And opportunism is just when we engage in tactics without a strategy. It's reactive mode, and the value of comfort is an immediate answer. My son, when he was looking for a school in college, he was looking to go to college, he ended up choosing the same college as his sister did. Why was that? Yeah, it was a good school, and it taught what he was wanting to major in. Was it the best school for his major? Was it the best fit for him? I don't think so. And I would think he'd probably say that today as well. But it was easy for him to make that decision because it was familiar to him. His sister went there. He'd been there a number of times. And it's like, okay, I think I'll just do the same thing. And that's what we engage in. We look oftentimes for the opportunistic, easy to do, and in disruption, in transition, we all want immediate answers, but the immediate answers may not be the best answers. So now we get to this lovely fellow, the Bluebird of happiness. And Bluebirds are those deals that come along. They look like opportunities. They fly in our window. We didn't expect them. In sales, some people I know are not familiar with Bluebird as common terminology. And back in the day in sales, a Bluebird is an opportunity that you didn't really ask for, but it came along, and boy, is it great, because you didn't have to spend a lot of work going out to get it. It just landed in your lap. Love them. But oftentimes we get these guys instead, buzzards. You see, buzzards are the most opportunistic of birds. These guys eat other birds. They eat mammals, they eat snakes, they eat lizards, they eat worms, insects, you name it, a buzzard will eat it. Now, here's the point I want to make. Bluebirds don't undermine your strategy, they accelerate it. They may cause you to re-examine it, but if it's a good fit, it enhances it. I asked, buzzards, on the other hand, won't do that. A buzzard's going to destroy your strategy. Give you an example of that. I was with one of my clients, a management consulting group a long time ago, had a senior executive that wanted to join their team. And they were discussing this as the executive team as to whether they wanted to bring this person in. He would open up a new business area for them. It wasn't just additive. It was an incremental new space for them. And I asked this question: if this person hadn't come to you, would you go out looking for it? In other words, if it weren't an opportunity that just landed in your lap, would you go and seek it out? Would it be a fit? And their answer was no. Their answer was no, we wouldn't add this line of business if this guy weren't here already to talk to us about adding this line of business to our portfolio. That's a good question to ask to discern whether an opportunity is fitting your strategy and a Bluebird, or whether it's a buzzard and will destroy your strategy. Well, as it turns out, they ignored that suggestion, and they were so attracted to this guy, they brought him on to lead this area in their company, only to find out that, yeah, he started up something he couldn't finish, and there was nobody else that could come in behind them to do so, and it took them off their game. And so the question is, if you don't have a strategy, or the point is you don't have a strategy, you can't tell between a Bluebird and a buzzard. One thing looks just like the other. I once had a client in an IT services company that loved to sell. I mean, this guy was a master salesperson. And he would go out and he'd sell a line of business to help in the retail area. And he'd bring on 20 people to help a client in retail. And then he'd go do the same in telecommunications. And there was nothing common about all the industries he was pursuing. It was just that, like, just going to sell to anybody that he could. He had no strategy for growing his business. And of course, he came into trouble when the one of the clients in an industry decided to terminate the contract. Now all of a sudden he had a bunch of people on a bench that he couldn't deploy because he hadn't built business around that particular sector. He was just being opportunistic. You know, we can make our own buzzards as well. I mean, when I was at Cray Research, we sold a Cray $30 million computer to a tiny island in the South Pacific. Why was that? Because they were incented to do so. It turns out that cost a lot more than it should have, and it was a bad deal. But we did it thinking that it would be better than it was, but we didn't go through the deeper thinking about what that full commitment is going to look like. That was more of a one-way door. I had the personal experience of trying to sell to a large retailer in the metro area, which will remain unspoken. It was a very frustrating experience, working really years to try to sell some software as I was CEO of a software company. Things worked really well. We were in the trial. We couldn't get them to convert the trial to a full production system. And it's like one thing after another, after another, after another. And then one morning I looked out on the pond on the lake that we live by here on, and there was this huge trumpeter swan on our pond. I've never seen a trumpeter swan here before. It was amazing. My dog at the time was old and suffered from some cataracts, a Staffordshire Terrier. And so he couldn't see the swan until I went out and walked down by the edge of the pond to get a closer look. And then all of a sudden he saw this bird and he tore in after it. And this dog is swimming wildly, and aged dog, swimming wildly to try to chase this trumpeter swan. And he would get close and the swan would just rise up and fly over the top of him. And would then just proceed to, you know, land in another place 50 yards away or so and swim along merrily. And the dog would just turn around and go chase after him. I finally called my neighbor and I said, look, we got to get in the boat and you got to help me rescue my dog because he's going to be out there till he swims himself to death. And I just can't bear telling my daughter that our dog died because he dog paddled himself chasing this swan. We get the dog back on land to get him in the house. And I realized that my chasing that account was my trumpeter swan. When I looked at the probabilities of it, when I really did the probabilistic math, it wasn't going to work. It wasn't going to converge, and I needed to let it go. There are some things in our lives that we pursue that are that way for us. We are so fixated on getting that outcome that we don't stop to think about whether that outcome has the probability to get and whether it's worth the effort and the time to do so. Well, we are on the transition trail, or you are on a transition trail trying to determine, well, what trail do I want to take and how do I get there? And I want to suggest that these blackbirds that come in, if you don't have a strategy, you're likely not to tell whether that next opportunity that comes your way is a blackbird or a bluebird. But I'll tell you that blackbirds, among other things they feed on these three things too. First is anxiety. And you may be experiencing that anxiety, you may be feeling quite a bit of it. But those expedient decisions where you say, oh, I got a bird in hand. Well, make sure the bird in hand is the bird that you want to have, and not that you're compromising what's most important to you. Unless you need the cash to continue fending for your family, make sure that your thoughts about those jobs are transitioning jobs, rather than this is the big thing that I'm landing after. Use it as a way to test where you need to go next. But we don't need to be anxious. You need to be thoughtful. Use the approaches that we've talked about, and that will help relieve your anxiety. Of course, I've got some other things too to suggest about that. Second thing is toxicity. This is an issue that most of us, because we're in transition, we don't like how we got to transition. And so we carry a lot of toxic thinking about our former job. And we might have a lot of repetitive negative thoughts, anger, pensiveness. It took me, when I left Cray, I left as part of a downsizing because they were preparing to sell to Silicon Graphics. My whole team, the Craysoft division, was laid off. And when I left, I realized after I started my business, about 8 months later, I felt a cleansing, that I'd finally detoxified. And I found myself with a thought for the first time that, oh, I don't need to run this idea by anybody. I don't need to make sure that this idea is acceptable to anybody in the company. I don't need to work or worry about whether who thinks about what I do. I don't need to earn their approval. And that was terribly freeing for me. And there may be some things in your current life and your current mental habits that you need to think about how to detoxify yourself. The third thing that Buzzards feed on, excuse me, is tunnel vision. And that is, tunnel vision is when you just continue to do the same thing that you did before. The example that I gave of the woman who just wanted to do what she did before, except that wasn't really what she wanted to do. We end up thinking about just an extension of the current one. When we were young, when you were in college or high school, what was the biggest question you got when you were young? If you're like many people, it would have been this question: what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your life? Isn't that a common question? We ask that of people today, the young people today. What do you want to do with your life? We're always inspired by that. But as you get older, you get to my age, I don't have anybody asking me, what do you want to do? They asking me, what do you do? And so it's almost like when you get to a certain age, now you have to account for what you've done or what your history is rather than what your future is. And I always think that we should be asking people, what do you want to do? Not what do you do? Let's talk about what do you want to do? And we don't often ask ourselves that question. Henry David Thoreau said, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. We might say that a little differently today. The mass of men lead lives of undiscovered desperation. Many of us don't know what we're desperate for, which leads me to Henry Nouwen's quote that I've come back to many, many times. Take time to believe in your free choice before you move forward in a new direction. How do you do that? Well, one of the things that I do is I journal every day. It's a great time if you're in transition to pick up journaling. It's a habit that I have found and done this every day for about almost the last decade, and I've maybe missed 4 or 5 days. And I write 3 pages, stream of consciousness. I don't know where it's going to go. Sometimes all it is a prayer. Sometimes it's just a jotting of my days. And other times it's working through some deep stuff that I've had to work through in my own life and getting my own thoughts correct about things. If you haven't done journaling or haven't thought about it, you'll see my website at the end. You can jump out there, search for the word journal and journaling, and I've got a bunch of tips and questions you can ask yourself, a process for how you can go through it, that sort of thing. Second thing that you can do is just take a retreat. I mean, we're kind of in a pandemic thing, but take some time away for doing nothing but to think through your future. And maybe you've spent enough time with that already that you're set to go. But sometimes just taking a retreat from the day-to-day and the current situation helps get that right strategy kick-started. When I was contemplating a business move, in other words, I was contemplating starting a new business, I spent every Friday afternoon, I drove to our church and just to find a quiet place where I could sit and walk through stuff. And it was a different setting. There was nobody around. I wasn't distracted by anything. I couldn't see any white squirrels. And those were things that was helpful to me to get a handle on that. Praying. Obviously prayer is vital. And I would suggest that many times we need to pray instead of for rescue, like, Lord, get me out of this situation. Give me that job. We need to be praying for guidance. And I know that sometimes it's easy to just say, well, now there isn't anything else I can do. It's all out of my hands. All I can do now is pray. So we tend to think about prayer as the last resort. All I can do now is pray. Instead, it ought to be the first resort. What you can do now is pray. And so if you're not doing that, I would encourage you to do that. Maybe even join with somebody else to join in with you on that as well. Meet with other people and ask intentional questions. You know, think about your strategy, ask them about theirs. How did they decide on the path that they took? Find ways in which you get the shortcuts that have learned from others to think through these things yourself. And explore, take risks, to try new jobs, do different things. I read about a woman who took on as many different jobs as possible in 1 year to discover what she enjoyed doing. She had no idea what she wanted to do. So she said, I'm just going to take any job, like cat sitter, you know, whatever. Now that may not be realistic for your situation, but the idea of saying, how can I launch experiments that are tests, they're probes, they're not final commitments. I'm not seeing this as a stepping stone. I'm seeing this just as a test. How can I do that in my own life? I want to point you to, since you're in transition, I want to point you to a resource that might be helpful to you. My co-host and I, Armina Sadi, we have 2 podcasts. One's called Reinventure Me. The other is called the Bold Idea Podcast. You can see them on Apple or whatever, but you go to reinventure.me is the one really about transition. And it's all about finding your next sweet spot in life. And I just listed, 5 or 6 episodes here that might be helpful to you. You know, the question you should never stop asking, 5 strategies to detoxify from your former employer. I recommend that one if you feel like that comment that I made earlier about detoxification applies to you. Check out that episode. How change affects your identity, how to know your job's hidden fees. That's a good one to know before you go into a job, because every job has a cost that it takes from you. How to create your personal mission statement, how to network like a pro. You guys are already in a networking group, but there might be some thoughts there that would be helpful for you. I'll also mention, as leaders, I do this email called Strategic Latte, which is once a week. I send out a question that a leader can think about for their business. And so if that's appealing to you, just to give you that cycle time to think through what you might do in your business once you landed a job, that might be helpful for you. And it's just a way to stimulate that system 2 type thinking that we've been talking about. Well, I want to leave you with this final quote from Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn wrote a book called The 5 Major Pieces to the Life Puzzle. And he said this: it seems that every form of life on this planet strives toward its maximum potential, except human beings. A tree does not grow to half on its own potential size and then say, I guess that will do. A tree will drive its roots as deep as possible. It will soak up as much nourishment as it can. It will stretch as high and as wide as nature will allow, and then look down as if to remind us how much each of us could become if we only do all that we can. Why is it that human beings, surely the most intelligent life form on earth, do not strive to achieve their maximum potential? Why is it that we allow ourselves to stop halfway? Why are we not constantly striving to become all that we can be? The reason is simple. We've been given the freedom of choice. In most cases, choice is a gift. But when it comes to doing all that we can with our abilities and our opportunities, choice can sometimes be more of a curse than a blessing. All too often, we choose to do far less than we could. We would rather relax under the shade of the growing tree than to emulate its struggle for greatness. As Jim Rohn would put it, this is easy to do, and it's easy not to do. So I'm going to ask you now, I asked you at the beginning to share an idea or think about one idea. I'd like to ask you in your chat bar, what was the one idea maybe that came to you as we spent our time here this morning? If you don't mind, just send a chat message out. Let's see what we got. Journaling. I did get a question from Kevin asking my website. I probably have about 5 of them, but my landing page is LearyGates.com, LearyGates.com. I'll have that up here in a second as we get more. So creating a strategy was another response. Going to define my rhythms and stay consistent to them in transition, and then can lead into a work environment. Really rethinking what I really want to do. using strategy and patience for your next opportunity. Learning to ask better questions. Doesn't hurt to ask book by Trey Gowdy may help. That's helpful. Don't chase. Yep. If you do have a strategy, you can't tell the difference between a Bluebird or a Buzzard. Yes. Move away from reactive biases. Don't be distracted. Excellent. Excellent. Well, my time's up, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak with you this morning. I hope you found it helpful. I'd be happy to answer any questions specifically to you. You can reach me at Larry@coefficientadvisors.com, or my home website is LarryGates.com.
Wow, Leary, I've got a complaint about your presentation.
Oh, okay, lay it on.
You said to come away with one idea. I've got 2 pages of ideas.
Okay,
That
all
was
right.
fantastic. Oh, wow. Thank you so much.
Was it worth that money bag?
Absolutely, it's on its way. I'm waiting for Uber. It's waiting for you. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation, and thanks also to Stuart. I hope either way that you've gotten something out of today. I know I have, and recordings of today's webinar will be posted at the bottom of the seminar portion of our website. And you will also receive an email tomorrow with links to things that we've talked about. So I just wanted to kind of summarize a couple of things that we went over as far as resources moving forward from Crossroads. Obviously, make sure you check out the website. That's a great place to go to for everything. And sign up for either the 8-week class of taking you through how to get through job transition in the best way, most efficient way possible. The networking group that meets every Thursday from 9 to 11. One-on-one coaching that you can sign up for and get personalized folks that will help you directly. Prayer support. Don't hesitate to reach out with any things that you'd like help praying over you and your transition journey. And next, our next webinar is going to be on September 3rd, and it is going to feature sportscaster Joe Schmidt, the sports director and author from KSTP, and he's going to be talking about creating a blueprint for living life of significance. And I've heard Joe speak before. He's a fantastic speaker. You've probably seen him on TV for many years. So don't miss that one on September 3rd. And we just hope today was a blessing to you and worthwhile. God's blessing to you in your journey. And enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll look forward to seeing you at a Crossroads event soon. Take care.